Hello, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be doing what should be the start of a new weekly feature for this channel. It's going to be the Premier League wrap. It's simply just going around the grounds and reviewing each game. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to watch all of these games. You're not going to sit there and watch every 3 p.m. game on replay unless you're fucking mental. But still, nonetheless, these games do provide opportunities to provide snapshots of each team as they progress throughout the season. And for the second week in the Premier League, it was fireworks for the most part. But look, we'll start at Villa Park, where Aston Villa took on Everton. 2-1 win to Villa, courtesy of goals from Danny Ings and Emi Buendia, and Everton did pull one back to at least make the last couple of minutes interesting with a Lucas Digne on goal. The interesting thing with this match was, I suppose, look, in all these games and in every single preview show you'll watch the Premier League, everything is about narratives, and generally speaking, most of the time it is concerning around the managers. This game probably being the most notable in the fact that it was Gerrard versus Lampard. These two managers were ultimately partnered each other for many years in the English midfield, and were probably put up against each other for most of the 2000s as the best two Premier League midfielders. Constantly compared as managers now, as they've stepped a couple of years away from their playing careers, and this is the first time they took on each other. Jokes of could they coexist on the same sideline? Well, they did, and it was Gerrard that had the better and the advantage. Not the greatest game in the world, but realistically, these two clubs are kind of not polar opposites. I mean, realistically, in terms of size of clubs, they both should be the same. But when you look at the squads they've inherited, Gerrard takes over from Dean Smith last year, and really is heavily backed by the Villa board. They bring in Philippe Coutinho, they bring in Lucas Digne. Over the summer, they bring in Diego Carlos. They've spent money and they've really given Gerrard a lot to play with here. Conversely, Lampard inherits an Everton team that are in an absolute car crash position, teetering towards relegation, pulls off some big results towards the end of the season, primarily through Richarlison and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, neither of which was there for them at the weekend. And I think that's really where they're going to that's going to hurt this Everton team. And it's realistically where the difference was the game run. The biggest takeaway from me from watching Villa play, well, firstly, look, they've just brought in Diego Carlos, and now he's ruptured his Achilles. So after this whole to and forward, this melodrama between Gerrard and Tyrone Mings and stripping him of the captaincy, Tyrone Mings is ultimately brought back into the team and actually makes him a very crucial challenge towards the end of the game. That was quite important, and it kind of maybe, well, doesn't go all the way to doubting the critics of Tyrone Mings and generally his style of play. Was an important moment for him in what's been a rather difficult start to the season. The other big takeaway for Villa was they just looked better with Emi Buendia in the side. Coutinho was sensational for them towards the back end of last season, particularly in that Leeds game. It just showed like he's a clear. You could see this is effectively a Champions League caliber player playing in a Villa Leeds relatively mid to bottom half of the table match. But he started slow this season, and the Villa fans are constantly either terrorizing Twitter or actively just calling for him to be included, and he continually is put on the bench. He scores a goal. They're a more dynamic, creative side when he's in the team. And initially, what I think Villa has started their opening game with Ollie Watkins up top and Coutinho and Leon Bailey either side. He dropped Bailey last week in favour of playing Watkins and Ings up top. Danny Ings scored a goal, well taken goal, admittedly. Was it a cut back across the box? He did well to finish it. It'd be interesting to see what Gerard goes forward, whether he sticks with a 4-3-3 or he plays two up front. But for the moment, this could be the start of maybe Coutinho being put into a bench role because based on the evidence of that game, it's hard not to see them going forward with Watkins and Ings up top and then Buendia in the hole. For Everton, as I said, they basically survived last season on the back of some late season form from Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Richarlison. Richarlison's gone to Spurs. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's gone back to the injury table, which unfortunately has been much of his Everton career, at least as of last season and the start of this season. He looks like he's going to be out for a couple of weeks, and it's the big tell with Everton. Dwight McNeil had a good end to the preseason. See what they get out of him. Damari Gray showed that he had moments of quality last season, but probably not enough. And Anthony Gordon is probably the crown jewel. He's been linked with a move to Chelsea for them, but he's not a striker. He's probably masquerading as a striker, such as their lack of options there at the moment. When Calvert-Lewin's out, this is probably why Everton got themselves into a hole at the end of last season. And it's probably why they're in a hole to start this season. The drop off between Calvert-Lewin and Salomon Rondon is quite significant, so much so that I suppose Lampard's shoehorning Gordon in as a striker, and until they can either find a short-term replacement or ideally probably move Gordon on and get someone, or not Gordon, sorry, apologies, Rondon on and get a short-term replacement in. Until this team gets Calvert-Lewin back in, they're going to struggle for goals. If they struggle for goals, it's going to be a very rocky start for Frank Lampard. I did kind of was thinking at the start, I was like, no matter who wins this, whoever wins this game between Villa and Everton is going to be, applauded and gives themselves a bit of a longer leash with supporters. Whoever loses is for whatever reason the antipathy towards these two as a manager is going to be labelled as a fraud. And someone that's closing ever, I suppose, ever closer to the sack. And I do think these two should be given more time, given running the second game of the season. But it's going to be hard to see how Everton are going to win games unless they can get a striker in. The second game of the afternoon, just by going chronological order, Leeds and Southampton, 2-all draw. Um, and probably a game Leeds probably threw away. They took a 2-0 lead, a brace from Rodrigo, and then Southampton made a substitute. Joe Aribo gets his first goal for the club after actually a great goal in pre-season, but I don't think they officially count. And then another great ball from Kyle Walker, or another great goal from Kyle Walker Peters with a sensational ball from Mara, the substitute they got in from Bordeaux. Um, I mean, look, Leeds. The big thing with them going into this season is they lost Rafinha and Calvin Phillips. So losing those two, a lot of questions naturally arose as to how they're going to replace that level of quality. And to be fair, they haven't done that bad. Aronson looks like he's going to be a good player. Tyler Adams, I think, covered a huge amount of ground. So it looks like the system that Marsh is going to bring in actually might be better than the sum of its parts. But realistically, throwing a 2-goal away to a struggling Southampton team that got battered 4-1 last week is probably not really going to cut it. These two these two teams essentially need to win these type of games. Um, but I mean, promising to see Rodrigo score. He's already got 3 goals after his goal last week. He got 6 in the totality of last season. It's big having Paddy Bamford back with them, but he was probably his lack of production in lieu of Bamford's injury last year is probably how they got into the relegation last season. So good to see him get back into form because after all, he is a Spain international. Um, for Southampton, I it's going to be interesting to see the experimentation that Ralph Hasenhüttl is going to employ. I mean, Che Adams didn't feature last week. He starts this week. They ultimately bring on Adam Armstrong, they've lost Armando Broja, who also was an option for them last season. But realistically, it's probably going to be a few weeks for Southampton trying to figure out their best side. Ward Prowse is obviously the staple of that team, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Mara brought in for Lavia next week. If you haven't seen the Kyle Walker Peters goal, go check it out. It's a sensational ball he gives, and something that could be a real signing for them. Uh, to the next game, Arsenal versus Leicester City. This is the Gabby Jesus show. 2 goals, 2 assists, and the Gunners are looking exceptionally strong. I had them tipped in a preseason video to make the top four, and they're certainly starting with a bang after 2-0 win on the opening day against Crystal Palace. They ran riot here to start with. I mean, Jesus' first goal was absolute perler. Like, I mean, interplay down the left wing. He kind of freezes the defender with a shimmy and then just sticks it into the right, kind of lofts it in. Second goal, he's there in the back stick with a header. Third goal, very lucky through Xhaka. Danny Wharton's an absolute nightmare coming for it. But the big thing for them is Martinelli. Martinelli looks like he's going to be a real player for them. could have got a goal very easily last week against Crystal Palace. Gets one to kind of cap off a 4-2 route. There was obviously an own goal from William Saliba, quite fortunate for Leicester. James Maddison goal was very well taken, although he kind of nutmegged Aaron Ramsdale at the near post. But the big thing for them is well, one is Jesus carrying his preseason form where he scored 7 goals into this season. They'll be delighted with that. The other notable thing is, I suppose, Zinchenko keeping Tierney out of the side. Don't think that's the second straight game now. We maybe briefly saw this with Nuno Tavares last year, where he kept Tierney out a couple of games when he came back from injury. Who knows if that's going to happen again this season? But Zinchenko is a better player than Nuno Tavares, so we could see some shifts there in the Arsenal backline, and also Ben White starting over Tomiyasu. With Saliba's strong performances through the first 2 games, I probably see Ben White shifting towards a right back role. But Arsenal looked the real deal. Leicester, that Danny Ward mistake is was quite clear and quite evident. I don't really judge them too badly for losing this game. Arsenal are just a better team. But the big thing for Leicester is going to be, can they keep these players? They've got James Maddison linked with a move away, although that seemed to cool down. But the Arsenal interest in Yuri Tielemans and the Chelsea interest in Wesley Fofana is quite significant. If they lose those players, Leicester could be in a bit of trouble. If they keep all those players, I expect Leicester to be knocking on the door for Conference League spots, Europa League spots. They still have a very good team. They've Harvey Barnes to come back as well. Wilfred Ndidi in the middle as well with Tielemans. They should be solid, but this is a kind of make or break for Brendan Rodgers after knocking on the door essentially of Europe the last couple of years. If he can keep their players, they have a strong nucleus. If he can't, they're in a bit of bother. Two, where are we after? We have Brighton and Newcastle. Yeah, probably 2 teams that will be looking for top 10 finishes this season. Nil all draw at the Amex. Um, and probably one where Nick Pope was largely the hero. I mean, it was 13 shots to 4, 7 shots on target to 1. The Pope will be interesting to see with regards to the World Cup later this year if he kind of continues this sort of form because he was quite good for Burnley last year as well. Can he challenge Jordan Pickford for the England #1 spot? Southgate generally is loyal to a couple of players there, so I don't think he actually will, but he's certainly making a strong case for it. Um, yeah, I mean, look, Brighton are. This is the kind of story of them, and it's probably why even when they struggled under Graham Potter initially, it's why the Brighton board had such patience with him, and the fact that the underlying stats were quite good. So even on a day where they don't score any goals, still have 13 shots and 7 on target. So they'll be happy with how they've started, and also I suppose realistically how they've replaced Basuma and Cucurella, which is 2 huge losses for that side. Um, but ultimately, it's going to be how much can they ultimately get out of Danny Welbeck. They play 5 at the back. They've Gross and Lallana up top, or just behind the striker. But if they can, and it looks like they're going to sell Neil Maupay off the Nottingham Forest. I think Welbeck is good at this stage in his career, but he's good in the way that like a squad player is good. If Brighton really want to make the next step, they're going to have to get in a clinical finisher. With all due respect to Danny Welbeck, who I think has had a great end to last season, and also had a very good game at Old Trafford to start the season last weekend. But that's probably a limiting factor for them because, to be honest, everywhere else, Webster, Veltman, Dunk, Casado looks like a real player in the midfield. They've got Trossard and March converted into wing backs now. They're a solid team. It's just up front where they probably need to become a bit more clinical. As regards to Newcastle, big thing with them, much in a similar vein. I think that look, their hands have been a little bit tied by the financial fair play in terms of getting signings in. But realistically, for them, it's a lot on Cally Wilson. If he stays fit, they're going to go well. If it's a drop off to Chris Wood, they could struggle. But not much else to report on this game. But probably, I mean, these 2 teams are fairly evenly matched. So while I might have expected goals, a draw is probably not too far off what many of us would have been looking at going into the weekend. The next one, Man City at Bournemouth. This is a televised game and just a slaughter. I mean, it realistically could have been more. The interesting thing with this game, though, was Erling Haaland had, I think, 8 touches and 2 passes. But when you actually watch the game, it did feel like he was a lot more threatening than that. Um, De Bruyne ran an absolute muck, nutmegging defenders for passes. He got a lovely goal, shimmy, then outside of the foot. He's the best midfielder in the Premier League, and he's probably the best midfielder I've probably ever seen. Made that point last week with Steven Gerrard, but I mean, week by week, this guy's just a menace. Um, but with Haaland, like two passes, one was an assist and the other was from a kickoff. But when you actually watch the play, the runs this guy makes him behind, and also there was a ball that was played in the Foden. Foden took a shot on, but if he squared it, Haaland has a tap in, and it's probably going to be the interesting thing with City this season. And you could definitely see it on the weekend by just the amount of touches and passes or the lack of that he had when he plays, it's gonna be direct. It's like when Pep is and the success of this Pep system over the last couple of years has been the build up to the final goal. And the staple City goal is they make about 15, 16, 20 passes. They get the ball into the byline, they cut back, and it's generally someone just bangs it into the far corner. Then from there, and with Haaland, he's going to give them a different approach. Haaland wants that goal that he got against West Ham. Ball slipped in behind, latches onto it like the speed of light and then buries it into the back of the net. Um, and while it's going to be harder for him to maybe get those goals than it was at Dortmund, just because of with City and how they play, teams are going to have 4 or 5 loaded boxes, two lines, two blanks of 4 or 5 and 4, largely when they play this team. He's not going to get a lot of those opportunities like that West Ham goal that we would think. But I mean, some of the runs that he still makes, he's going to be a physical, abrasive force, and it's hard. He's hard not to be the main talking point as much as people kind of pump him up, and as much as he becomes a lot of the focus. He is a lot of the focus because other than that, this team is just still the same juggernaut. I mean, like Haaland got what 8 touches and 2 passes, and they still scored 4 goals, and it could have easily been 5 or 6 as well. So not really much to talk about on City's ends. They're probably the most automatic team in football when they come up against a lower league team. There was that maybe a couple of years ago where sometimes Stoke or Wolves or the likes would unsettle them, but largely this was always going to end up one way, and it's exactly probably how a lot of us thought was going to be. City wiping the floor with them. Bournemouth, after a good start against Villa last week, you can't really judge anything. A newly promoted team going to the Etihad, so yeah, they were kind of lambs to the slaughter. So TBD on them until we see more evidence in their next match. The Wolves Fulham game. This is a game that was it kind of oddly ended up in a deserving nil-all draw. Just simply because Wolves dominated, at least from what I could see. They missed some great chances where Pedro Neto rounded the keeper. I think Ryan Aït-Nouri stuck one over the bar that was pretty much like a cross goal that was he should have led to a tap in. Couldn't finish off from there. And Fulham were largely bailed out by the fact they got an Alexander Mitrovic penalty. Good save from Jose Sa, dove the right way. But I don't think Wolves are going to be too worried. Their coach Bruno Lage came out after the game, kind of basically said that look, this is the same as they started last season. I think last season they started off with 3 successive 1-0 defeats, but they come out this season and yeah, they this is a game they should have won, but as long as they're creating chances, I think they'll be okay for the most part. I mean, we'll see how Gonzalo Gueda is the player they brought in Valencia. We'll see how that ultimately shapes up and who exactly plays up top for them. Morgan Gibbs White is largely you'd figure going to be in the 10 role, and then the Podens and Neto either side with Huang up front. How Guedes fits into that? Does Podens go up front as a false nine? It's going to be hard to see, but you figure he's just going to get his legs under him to start with, and then will be brought in increasingly as the season wears on. Uh, but as far as Fulham are concerned, yeah, Palhinha is good. They're going to be look like they're going to be feisty, and they look like they're going to be competitive. But ultimately, just as they got into this league, a lot of their success is going to be driven on the back of Mitrovic. Um, and that's if they can get him chances and they can feed him balls, they'll be competitive. If they won't, they're probably going to go down. So more on that as it unfolds. The the finale for Saturday, Brentford 4, Manchester United nil. Um, This was fascinating to watch. I watched this at the pub with a bunch of mates, some hardcore United fans, others big Liverpool fan, big Spurs fan. And after United went 2-0 down after what, like 15 minutes, the United fans evacuated to the smoking area to try and contemplate what was going on. And the sheer glee from the opposing Liverpool and Spurs fan, just like delighted to see, I suppose, Brentford tear into a United team in free fall, and that is what this is ultimately. I mean, look, you could do almost a weekly video or an almost daily video on United at this stage, and the many. I mean, even today they're being linked with 35-year-old Jamie Vardy. After last week, Arnautovic and Rabiot, but not to get too much into the whole structure and all the myriad of problems that exist at Old Trafford. This game purely was they never really gave themselves a chance, United. I mean, the first goal, regardless of any kind of Glazer ownership or struggle, it's David De Gea spilling and bundling a relatively easy shot from that distance into his own net. And from there, United lose their heads. The second goal, short pass to Ericsson. Ericsson tries to pass it at the fullback, turns the ball over, and it's an easy goal from there. Um, and then the third goal was just like it's just Brentford wanting it more from a corner. I think Tony wins it at the back stick, fires it back across, and then Ben Mee towers over 5'9" Lissandro Martinez. And this was going to be one of the downsides and downfalls of getting in a 5'8" centre back. He's not going to win these type of balls. Whatever he's going to give you, passing going forward and progressive, and his accuracy and the type of play that Ten Hag wants to play. This is the massive limiting factor in being that height as a centre back. But I'm not going to blame Martinez because this was just a horror show of performance. Um, and it's a weird time to be talking about United because you can go into great depth about them, but they're also just like they're becoming ever and ever less kind of relevant to talk about because regardless of the spend, regardless of the budget they spend, this is just a completely rattled and fractured unit. And I think Ralph Rangnick said it best. These performances and these type of teams, like that team that lost 4-0 on Brentford, that's not very different at all from the team that got battered, I think 5-1 at the end of last season by Brighton. Rangnick said it right. They need about like 10 new players in there. And so far, they've only got Malacia, Martinez, and Ericsson. So it's a massive indictment against the club's recruitment. In fairness to Brentford on the other side, without getting because the obvious story from that game is the abject failure that is Manchester United. But in fairness to Brentford, they press, they run, they're relentless. Um, Tony and Embuemo going forward. Jensen, we see Damsgaard now going to get brought into the mix. They're hungry. As long as they can kind of keep that intensity and enthusiasm, well, they shouldn't be battering teams 4-0, much less teams with the kind of, I suppose, the spending outlay of Manchester United. Um, they're going to be, I would have had them tip for relegation in and around the relegation mark. If they play like that, they're going to give teams problems just through their sheer how they work as a unit off the ball. I suppose this, the pace and the intensity that they have going forward, particularly the counter, like the goal. I think the fourth goal for Embuemo from Tony was a superb ball, just great football. So Brentford continuing seeming to surprise. Uh, West Ham versus Forest to start with on Sunday. Uh, Forest win the game. Good win for Steve Cooper. Taiwo Amani gets on the score sheet, but realistically, looking back on this game, West Ham they let one slip here. 19 shots to 13. Missed penalty in Declan Rice. Benrahma hits the bar with a free kick. West Ham had the better chances here. But it's a big game they're going to lose. I mean, like this is a team that would have been looking for a top six, top seven, and well, I don't think it's beyond them yet. They're 0 from 2 to start with, and they probably had the better of the chances here. Um, I mean, they still have a good squad. Mikel Antonio brought off towards the end for Gianluca Scamacca. We'll see if Scamacca can get into this team, become a starter. Because realistically, will Antonio has done well over the last couple of seasons, masquerading as a striker and really ultimately being a guy that's converted from a right back to a right wing into a striker. He's a limiting factor for them, and it's why they went out and spent 35 million on Skamaka. Um, so that's going to be the big change that I anticipate seeing. The other one will be interesting to see is if um what they're going to do with Cornet. Benrahma was looking like the guy that was going to make way, but he's probably arguably their best player at the weekend. So we'll see how he fits in. At the very least, he's going to give them a bit more strength and depth, but a big opportunity wasted for West Ham this one. Forest showed tremendous, I suppose, perseverance, and I suppose they really stuck together to hang on. Um, but it's a big win for them, much like kind of I suppose Fulham getting a result last week against Liverpool. And these newly promoted teams, they're going to have to kind of either get wins or draws from some of these teams that will be finishing in the top eight. Particularly to start the season. I mean, the most important things for these newly promoted teams is to start well. If you can start well, you can kind of get a bit of confidence underneath you. If you get blown off the face of the park in the first month of the season, it can be hard to restore that confidence. But still some more signings to bring in for Forest. It looks like they're going to be, as I said, bringing in Neil Mopay. They're obviously going after the model that they need to spend big to try and stay in the Premier League. Um, and while they probably do to an extent, I mean, they lost Jed Spence and James Garner for last season. They're going to be up against it, so this is a big win for Steve Cooper, and it might give them a bit of confidence going forward. But I mean, they've got a tough trip to Goodison Park next week, and that will be an interesting game for them, particularly against Everton, who, as I said, have lost their open to the start of the season. And finally, the game of the weekend, Chelsea Spurs. This was a cracker. I mean, but the interesting thing going into it is that so Spurs, after the kind of squad they put together over the summer, as well as the 4-1 win they had over Southampton last week, and all the kind of malaise and the uncertainty and the disappointment over Tuchel's preseason, you kind of expect the Spurs to come in here and take the upper hand and really take it to Chelsea. And I suppose this is the thing, we constantly have to write off preseason. I mean, it's hard not to because it's the only form of games and the only site of players that you get during the summer. But like United had a great preseason and they've been a shambles to start the season. Chelsea had a woeful preseason, and I mean they scratch out and they eke out a 1-0 win at Goodison. Tough place for them to go, particularly, and they were the much better side here. I mean Harry Kane gets a late goal, late equaliser. Thomas is absolutely dust up on the sidelines with Tuchel and Conte. I love to see it. I mean, it was like it's the drama. I mean, some people kind of look down on it and kind of like, what are they at? But I mean, it's the kind of passion and it's the kind of reaction of what happens when you have Antonio Conte. I mean, obviously, look, this guy's a great manager. He has a certain system. He has certain tactics. He builds his team around certain players. But ultimately, he's given Spurs a bit of fire and a bit of backbone that they probably lacked over the last season, and they can definitely tell the kind of players are feeding off it. The big two talking points was Anthony Taylor. I mean, look, on that first goal from Hoiberg, like people are saying it's a foul. I've seen angles of that where Bentancur wins the ball. If he wins the ball, I think that's a clean challenge. Much less even if he doesn't, it's 45 seconds from play. The Romero taking down Cucurella on Kane's equaliser. I mean, he pulls his hair. Like it probably should be it should be a foul. Probably should be a yellow card from there, and it probably should be a free kick the other way. But even with VAR, I mean, there's probably going to have to be a certain acceptance that you're not going to eradicate human error from the game. I kind of do sympathise with Tuchel, especially on the second goal. It probably should have been a free out, but like those things are just missed sometimes. It's the 95th minute, and he takes him down, he pulls him down. If the ref doesn't call it, and it goes out for another corner, defend the other corner, like defend the second corner. I can see, obviously, look, there's an argument for it. Um, and but like and then again, what level does VAR get involved in all these kind of like? Do they do this in every minute, or are we just focusing on it now because it's the last minute and it's led to a goal? Like, are VAR getting involved with like pulling and pushing in a corner in the 32nd minute of a nil all game? Probably not. Probably not. But ultimately, the big takeaway I had from this game, Chelsea look a lot more solid than I suppose a lot of us anticipated during pre-season. Still will be determined if they're going to get a striker. The other thing is they've Ruben Loftus-Cheek, a centre back, played okay yesterday, but is he going to be the long-term answer there? Not sure. But I mean, we're anticipating they bring in a striker and centre back. But for the crux of it and the bones of this team, yeah, they look good. And Spurs, bit of bottle and a bit of fight. Still would concern me that even with that, they seemingly, and even though we think they've made a lot of progression, they still go on the back foot a lot of the times away from home. At home, they can be a different story, but when they play big teams away, Manchester United last season, Arsenal last season, when they go to Chelsea, other than City, who they seemingly for some reason have their card, um, yeah, Liverpool when they completely shut up shop. They don't really seem to have the ability to take on teams in the same manner in the top six, particularly away from home. But ultimately, that's going to be it's a 2-all result. Anytime they get any sort of result in that kind of derby against Chelsea, it's good. But in the nature of it, and I suppose with all the aftermath afterwards, there's going to be a real kind of rallying cry for Spurs and a good boost for them, at least from a moral point of view. And from a product point of view, I mean, yeah, that's the Premier League. 2-all draw, drama, last minute equalizer, talking points. It's kind of why we love it. And I wasn't gonna go all like Graham Souness. It's a man's game, and we got our football back. I mean, it's not like 1978. But in theory, I mean, like, yeah, like that's the kind of that is the kind of Premier League at its best for me. Two teams just like going at it, the drama, the goals, the level of football. I mean, even Reece James goal, Sterling, they work it from left to right. It was a great match and the match of the weekend, and something that I think while it often gets overlooked. I mean, the big derbies relatively in the Premier League. It's United, Liverpool, it's Liverpool, Everton, it's Arsenal, Tottenham. They're the kind of standout. City, United. That Chelsea Spurs one is consistently one of the best games. And generally always produces fiery outcomes, because seemingly regardless of who the managers are, going back to the Battle of the Bridge 6 years ago. So it's probably the most underrated, and from my mind, it's probably has become the best derby in the league. But look, that's it for this week's video. Hopefully, going to be going to do these more as each week goes on, because it does provide seemingly as the season go on. There's talking points and narratives around all these games, and look, they're fun to explore.